All right, kids, we've reached the end of the month of March, which is also the end of Women's History Month. And today is Good Friday 2024, plus Beyonce's Cowboy Carter is here, and that equals a Renaissance weekend. But if you didn't know, March is also Greek American Heritage Month and Irish American Heritage Month. Most are aware of the second one, probably due to St. Patrick's Day, when we're all Irish for at least one day.
Now don't you get smart, nigga. Show hands off me.
Thanks, but no thanks. And I'm not going to return the favor even if I wanted to, because everybody wants to be black until it's time to be black. Or until the police come, especially that one. But I would like to remind Middle America about French American Month, German American, Polish American, and Italian American Heritage Months. There's even a Confederate History Month. They should remember all those for the next time they want to ask why there isn't a White History Month. Nonsense like that turns February, the shortest month, into the longest month. But you know what?
Look, I'm gonna be the one to say it, and don't get mad. Don't get mad. I gotta say it. This Black History Month was a little quiet. Am I wrong? Am I wrong? It was a little mute. What's going on?
That TikTok was from Black History Month 2023, but Black History Month 2024 was quiet too. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but maybe in a few years I won't have to explain why there's a BET and HBCUs either. Even when I respond, in order to explain how and why we, and everybody, have those platforms and resources, I'm told that I'm a victim. Despite the fact that I have never mentioned if institutional, structural, or systemic racism has impacted me personally whatsoever. I've addressed that before. With that said, I'm also called a race baiter, which is what we're going to talk about today. Not the people calling Beyonce's country music inauthentic or say she's pandering, or those questioning black entertainment or black colleges. Me. I'm the race baiter. And the likes of Dr. Rashad Ritchie, apparently. When he used to invite me on his show, we were both called race baiters. Twins, brothers, race baiters. Well, I was called a race baiter. They labeled him a race hustler. He's more successful than I am. Anyways, Time magazine says the term race hustler has been in use since the early 1900s. Writing in 1959, historian Richard Bardolph noted that any given black spokesman could be a militant race hero to one person, but a cheap race hustler to another. So, Dictionary.com defines race baiting as acts of racist provocation, especially in speech and writing, including racial dog whistles, hate speech, threats, and other forms of harassment targeting one or more racial groups or members of such a group, often in the context of political or cultural polemics. Along with the incitement of racial hatred, often for political purposes. Race baiting stirs up or baits racial hatred. And in this write-up about where the term race baiting comes from, Dictionary.com says, it appeared as early as 1923 in a New York Times article about an Armistice Day march in which Father Francis P. Duffy, chaplain of the 69th Regiment in the First World War, is quoted saying he deplored all prejudices, especially race baiting. The noun, race baiter, appears slightly earlier in a 1920 Fort Wayne News and Sentinel article about Indian Senator James Watson, described as an extremist in his social views, a bigot in religion, and a race baiter. Definitions and descriptions aside, let's actually look at race baiting in action. Some of y'all think this will be me showing you my segments on Indisputable, but nah. I'll be giving white America what it wants this time of year, white history. And we're going to start with North Carolina. In the 1890s, Wilmington was the largest city in North Carolina, featuring a majority black population. There were black professionals and businessmen. There were black men elected to local office. Wilmington was also the home of Alexander and Frank Manley, two brothers who owned the Wilmington Daily Record, a black newspaper which may have been the only daily black newspaper in the country. In state and local elections of 1894 and 1896, the Fusionist Party, a biracial collaboration of the North Carolina Republican Party and Populist Party, won pretty much everything on statewide ballots those years. So, Southern Democrats and the Democratic Party, also known as the conservatives of the 19th century, couldn't just let black people and Negro sympathizers get away with this Negro domination in government, also known as white people having a 2/3 majority at that time. So the Democrats and their party, the ones that didn't have black representation and didn't want black people to vote, like the grand old party today, it's weird, kind of like they switched, developed a strategy for the 1898 campaign, led by Democratic State Party Chairman Furnival Simmons, who, along with the Secret Nine, prominent Wilmington men who had recently joined forces that were unhappy with what they deemed to be Negro rule. You know, the Negroes, who made less money than their white counterparts, owned less property, got worse interest rates on loans, had their homes and businesses routinely set on fire, but not as much as you think. Yeah, them. Leading up to the election of 1898, there was a white supremacy campaign in Wilmington, a white declaration of independence, red shirts, a crew that was kind of like the KKK, were strategically placed at or near polling stations in order to intimidate and to prevent black people and Republicans from serving their civic duty. White supremacist men were recruited who could write, speak, and ride on these black people. Writers were those who could create propaganda in the media. Speakers were those who would be powerful orators. And riders were those who could ride a horse and be imposing. One of the speakers was Alfred Moore Waddle, former congressman, with Rebecca L. Felton as a writer. They knew that nothing would rile up white supremacists like blackness. See, U.S. history. Combined, those two could, most importantly, make black men out to be rapists, sexually assaulting white women because white men weren't there to protect them. Here's what Felton said in one speech. When there is not enough religion in the pulpit to organize a crusade against sin, nor justice in the courthouse to promptly punish crime, nor manhood enough in the nation to put a sheltering arm about innocence and virtue, if it needs lynching to protect women's dearest possession from the ravening human beast, then I say lynch 1,000 times a week if necessary. However, Alexander Manly, who I mentioned earlier, saw things a different way.
He made a simple observation that at the time was shocking.
That white women who had liaisons with black men did so voluntarily and enthusiastically.
Manly pretty much said, in a nutshell, sometimes white women choose to be with black men.
Black men are sufficiently attractive for white girls of culture and refinement to fall in love with them, as is very well known to all. That made Southern Democrats, white supremacists, and the Secret Nine mad. We'll get back to Wilmington later. Sadly, this black men are rapists, super predator, flying Negro vampire thing was also used in 1870s Colfax, Louisiana. Let me set the scene. In the parish seat of Grant Parish, parishes in Louisiana are like counties or boroughs, there was the 1876 race for the governorship. Actually, this part is pretty boring, so I'm going to use heroes/villains from the hit movie Megamind to explain what happened. We have former Republican Governor Henry Clay Warmoth, who, in 1872, moved to the Liberal Republicans. Liberal Republicans opposed President Grant's Reconstruction policies, calling it corruption. This is Old Chum. A group of liberal Republicans who fused with Democrats, fusionists, nominated Democrat and former ex-Confederate battalion commander John McHenry to succeed Warmoth as governor, freeing up Warmoth to become U.S. Senator in Washington, D.C. Are you still with me? He's Titan/Hal Stewart. Challenging McHenry was one of Louisiana's U.S. Senators, Republican William Pitt Kellogg. It was this election that led to two different political parties declaring victories, two different celebrations and ceremonies, two different governments. Man, nobody's Megamind. Everybody's Metro Man because they didn't step up when stuff went down. Will Ferrell won't be in the sequel. Anyways, courts and judges got involved in order to iron this thing out. During this time, McHenry's people tried to take over the state arsenal. Something about a cannon being brought to a gunfight. Things escalated from there to be a full-blown conflict. Black people, whose interests aligned with Republicans, decided to hunker down and defend the local parish government. Then, a man named Christopher Columbus Nash, another Confederate veteran, elected parish judge and sheriff respectively, who had been held for 18 months as a prisoner of war at Johnson's Island here in Ohio once upon a time, spread rumors about black men, as I alluded to earlier, described this way. Romance was in the air around the white towns and campsites where, quote, many love affairs blossomed that would otherwise have never come to bud, as a female participant recalled. Sexually titillated by their own exploits, white fathers and brothers were vigilant in protecting their women from the sexual advances of black men. The prolonged absence from home exasperated white concerns about the black threat to their households. A motivating factor for the onset of violence, sexual paranoia remained a simmering political concern. Telling white men that black men were going to kill them and take their white women was an incredible recruiting tool, as outlined in the 2008 book, the Colfax massacre. And massacre is what it was. And what one historian said was the worst instance of racial violence during Reconstruction. According to reports, James Hadnot, leader of a white paramilitary, was shot and wounded, later died, by someone from the courthouse. In the white version, black people did it. Quote, in the Negro version, the men in the courthouse were stacking the guns when the white men approached, and Hadnot was shot from behind by an overexcited member of his own force. Then, on Easter Sunday, I might add,
150 black people are murdered by a white mob because they were protesting their inability to be politically represented. Congress says, we can't allow that kind of violence. We're going to have our federal prosecutors prosecute those people for that violence. And white people are convicted. And the United States Supreme Court says, no, Congress doesn't have the authority to prevent that kind of violent intimidation. States have rights, and the federal government can't impinge on those rights.
Really? There's no telling how many black people died during the Colfax massacre, in battle, execution style after being captured, lynched by mob after being imprisoned. Hundreds jumped in rivers and swamps. Thousands were displaced. The same can be said for the Wilmington insurrection around 25 years later. 2 days after Election Day, November 10th, 1898, Alfred Waddell led some 2,000 white men in an attack on the office of the Daily Record, which was vandalized and razed. They set it on fire. They brought a Gatling gun, homie. There were forced resignations of duly elected officials. It is generally believed that as many as 60 black people were killed. And the historical retelling was a lot of, well, black people started it. Wilmington, the first and only, for now, successful coup in American history. While we're at it, Alfred Waddell became the mayor of Wilmington, North Carolina for the next 8 years. Rebecca L. Felton got to live out the rest of her life and enhance her political career. She was the last congressperson to formally enslave someone and the first woman to serve as U.S. Senator, serving for 1 day. Meanwhile, if you're wondering, Alexander Manley escaped Wilmington before the massacre, preserving his life. Although some black people will go on to blame him for this tragic event. I'll get back to this sentiment in a minute. I can't stress this enough. No repercussions for the murderous whites. They boasted about what they did to the local press and took pictures next to what should have been considered evidence. And what happened in Colfax was deemed a riot if we were to believe this historical marker, which was clear to let it be known that 3 white people died too. This marker, labeled Wilmington Coup, does better. Both have been updated in recent years to reflect what actually happened. The legacy of Wilmington and Colfax lasted decades in the form of suppressed black representation in politics. I need to mention that the Colfax massacre and the Wilmington insurrection took place before and after the Compromise of 1877, respectively. In order to settle 1876's presidential election, the outcome of the race hinged largely on Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina, the only 3 states in the South with Reconstruction-era Republican governments still in power. A bipartisan congressional commission debated over the outcome early in 1877. Allies of the Republican Party candidate, Ohio's own Rutherford B. Hayes, met in secret with moderate Southern Democrats in order to negotiate acceptance of Hayes' election over New York Democrat Samuel B. Tilden. And I could do an entire episode on the Compromise of 1877, which was the end of Reconstruction, which was supposed to be the enfranchising of black citizens of the US. However, why was the protection of black people in the South even on a negotiating table? The playbook is this, something I lifted straight from the Wikipedia page about the Wilmington insurrection. I'm going to say it how it's written. Black people were caught between not meeting the expectations of affluent whites and exceeding the expectations of poor whites, paradoxically progressing too fast and too slow at the same time in the eyes of white residents. Going back to that article from Time magazine that I referenced earlier, the writer also brings up Booker T. Washington, who, in his autobiography, Up from Slavery, described, well, people like me as those who make a business of keeping the troubles, the wrongs, and the hardships of the Negro race before the public. If you do this as a minority or an ally, you're a race baiter. If you're black and successful, whether your achievements were too fast or too slow, it disproves the existence of systemic racism. There were no racist obstacles or barriers to overcome. If you're not successful, it's your behavior. Nothing's holding you back. Unless you're white, then your shortcomings come from black, good-looking, charming people, black voting power, representation in government, policies to build upward mobility for black people, merely moving to a European American majority neighborhood, existing, affirmative action, CRT, wokeism, DEI, and whatever comes next. Racial dog whistles, by the way, it's in the definition. So is provocation. Invoking blackness riles white America up. Race baiting. Conservatives know what race baiting is and isn't. They know who a race hustler is and isn't. How is Fox News not race hustling when showing black violence and black crime? Quote, every Negro lynched is called a big, burly black brute, said Alexander Manley. He was so good. How is MSNBC not race hustling for avoiding doing these things? How is CNN? Conservatives know that identity politics is only allowing white men who own property to vote, like the forefathers of this country, just like they know the legitimacy that is intersectionality when they claim that they are victims due to being white conservative males. As I close, if you didn't know, black entertainment television was created as a response to black artists not getting airplay on MTV, for example, under the guise of only playing rock music. BET plays white artists, always has. And HBCUs exist because access to higher education was denied to black people. And actually, up to 24% of students at historically black colleges and universities are non-white. I'm a militant race hero to some and a cheap race hustler to others. With that said, I'm gonna give both a reason to think these things, and they can lob either label towards me, and I'ma wear it confidently, peeking from beneath the brim of my cowboy hat, 10 toes down, but in cowboy boots. Because, like I said, Beyonce is here. We gonna be all right.